The camera's flash illuminated the modest parlor of the Whitmore cottage on Elm Street, capturing what would become the last photograph of Margaret and Eleanor Whitmore together. It was October 15th, 1935, and the autumn light filtering through the lace curtains cast a golden glow over the mother and daughter as they posed for what Margaret had insisted would be a memory to treasure forever. Eleanor, just turned 16, sat perched on the edge of the burgundy velvet armchair that had belonged to her grandmother. Her dark hair was carefully pinned in the fashionable finger waves of the era, and she wore her best Sunday dress, a navy blue creation with pearl buttons that her mother had sewn by hand. Margaret stood behind her daughter, one hand resting gently on Eleanor's shoulder, the other smoothing down her own emerald green dress. At 34, Margaret Whitmore was still a striking woman, with the same dark eyes as her daughter and a smile that could light up any room. "Hold still now, ladies," called Mr. Pemberton, the traveling photographer who had set up his equipment in their small parlor. "This will be beautiful, a perfect portrait of two beautiful women." Eleanor tried not to fidget as the seconds ticked by. She had been excited about having their photograph taken, especially since it was such a rare treat. Money had been tight since her father's death 3 years earlier, and luxuries like professional photographs were few and far between. But her mother had been insistent, almost urgently so, that they have this picture taken. "Why now, Mother?" Eleanor had asked when Margaret announced she had hired Mr. Pemberton. "What's the special occasion?" Margaret had simply smiled that mysterious smile of hers and said, "Sometimes we need to capture the moments that matter most, darling. You'll understand someday." The flash went off with a brilliant burst of light, and Eleanor blinked rapidly, seeing spots dance before her eyes. Mr. Pemberton emerged from behind his camera with a satisfied expression. "Wonderful. That should develop beautifully. You'll have your prints ready by next week, Mrs. Whitmore." "Actually," Margaret said, reaching into her small purse, "I'd like to pay for rush service. Could you have them ready by tomorrow afternoon?" Mr. Pemberton looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, though, there will be an additional charge." "That's perfectly fine," Margaret replied, pressing several bills into his hand, more money than Eleanor had seen her mother spend on anything in months. After Mr. Pemberton packed up his equipment and left, Eleanor helped her mother rearrange the furniture in their small parlor. The cottage was modest but comfortable, with just enough room for the two of them. Margaret had worked tirelessly as a seamstress to keep them afloat after Eleanor's father, Thomas, had died in a factory accident. The small insurance settlement had helped for a while, but Margaret's income from taking in sewing barely covered their basic needs. "Mother," Eleanor said, as they moved the armchair back to its usual position by the window, "where did you get the money for the photograph? And the rush service?" Margaret paused in her arranging of the doilies on the side table. For just a moment, Eleanor caught a flicker of something in her mother's eyes, anxiety, fear, but it was gone so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "I've been saving up," Margaret said simply. "Sometimes a mother needs to do special things for her daughter." That evening, as they sat down to their usual simple dinner of soup and bread, Eleanor noticed that her mother seemed distracted. Margaret kept glancing toward the window, as if expecting someone, and she barely touched her food. "Are you feeling well, Mother?" Eleanor asked, reaching across the small table to touch Margaret's forehead. "You seem different today." Margaret captured her daughter's hand and held it tightly. "Eleanor, my darling girl, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've grown into such a beautiful, intelligent young woman. Your father would be so proud." "Mother, you're scaring me. Why are you talking like this?" "I'm not trying to frighten you, sweetheart. I want to make sure you know how much I love you, how much you mean to me." Margaret's voice was thick with emotion, and Eleanor could see tears gathering in her mother's eyes. "Of course I know that, and I love you too. But Mother, what's wrong? You've been acting strangely all day." Margaret stood abruptly and began clearing the dishes, though they had barely eaten. "Nothing's wrong, dear. I'm just feeling sentimental, I suppose. Now why don't you work on your schoolwork while I finish the Henderson dress? Mrs. Henderson is coming to pick it up tomorrow, and I want to make sure it's perfect." Eleanor wanted to press further, but she recognized the tone in her mother's voice that meant the conversation was over. She gathered her books and settled at the small desk in the corner of the parlor, while Margaret took out her sewing basket and the nearly completed dress she had been working on for weeks. As Eleanor worked on her mathematics homework, she found herself glancing up at her mother frequently. Margaret's hands moved with their usual skill as she added the final touches to the dress, but her face was tense with concentration that seemed to go beyond the intricate beadwork she was completing. "Mother," Eleanor said suddenly, "do you remember when Father used to read to us in the evenings? You would sit in that chair by the window, and I would curl up on the floor beside you, and Father would read from whatever book he had borrowed from the library." Margaret's hands stilled on the fabric. "Of course I remember, darling. Those were wonderful times." "I miss him so much," Eleanor continued, "but I'm grateful we have each other. I can't imagine what I would do without you." This time, Margaret did look up, and Eleanor was startled to see tears streaming down her mother's face. "Oh, my sweet girl," Margaret whispered, "you are stronger than you know, so much stronger than you realize. Mother, please tell me what's wrong. You're frightening me." Margaret set down her sewing and came to kneel beside Eleanor's chair. She took her daughter's hands in both of hers, and Eleanor could feel that they were trembling. "Eleanor, I need you to promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. Please let me finish. If anything ever happens to me, I need you to know that you can take care of yourself. You're smart and capable, and you have your father's strength. Promise me that you'll remember that." Eleanor stared at her mother, her heart beginning to race. "Mother, you're scaring me. Why are you talking like this? Are you sick? Are we in some kind of trouble?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor could see her struggling with some internal decision. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are some things about your father's death that you don't know, Eleanor. Things I've tried to protect you from." "What do you mean?" "The accident at the factory. It wasn't really an accident." Eleanor felt the world tilt around her. "What are you saying?" "Your father discovered something at the factory, something illegal. He was going to report it to the authorities, but before he could—" Margaret's voice trailed off. "Before he could what?" "Before he could, someone made sure he couldn't." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Eleanor felt as if she couldn't breathe. You mean someone killed him?" Margaret nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I've suspected it for 3 years, but I could never prove it. And I was too frightened to pursue it because I was afraid of what might happen to you. But why are you telling me this now?" Margaret stood and walked to the window, peering out into the gathering darkness. "Because I think they know that I know, and I think they're coming for me." Eleanor shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "We have to go to the police. We have to—" "The police won't help us, Eleanor. Some of them are involved. Your father tried to go to the police and look what happened to him. Then we'll leave, we'll go somewhere else, start over. We can't run forever, darling, and I won't put you in danger by keeping you with me." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. "What are you saying?" Margaret turned from the window and looked at her daughter with an expression of infinite sadness and love. "I'm saying that I may have to go away for a while. And if I do, you'll need to be strong. You'll need to take care of yourself. I won't let you go. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." Margaret crossed the room and pulled Eleanor into a fierce embrace. "My brave, beautiful girl, I love you more than life itself. Never forget that." They held each other for a long moment, and Eleanor could feel her mother's tears soaking into her hair. When Margaret finally pulled away, she seemed to have regained some of her composure. "Now," she said, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief, "I want you to go upstairs and pack a small bag. Just the essentials. Some clothes, your father's watch, anything that's truly important to you." "Why?" "Because if something happens tonight, you may need to leave quickly. Mrs. Patterson next door has always been fond of you. If you need help, go to her. She'll know what to do." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but something in her mother's tone convinced her that this was not the time for rebellion. She went upstairs to her small bedroom and mechanically packed a few items into her school satchel. Her hands shook as she folded her spare dress and gathered her few precious belongings. When she came back downstairs, she found her mother standing by the mantelpiece, looking at the collection of family photographs displayed there. Margaret had lit several candles, and their flickering light cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Mother, what are you doing?" "I'm saying goodbye," Margaret said simply, "to this house, to our life here, to the memories we've made." Eleanor set down her bag and went to stand beside her mother. Together, they looked at the photographs. Eleanor as a baby in her father's arms, the three of them at a church picnic the summer before Thomas died. Margaret and Thomas on their wedding day, looking impossibly young and happy. "We were happy here," Eleanor said softly. "Yes, we were, and I want you to remember that happiness no matter what comes next." They spent the next hour sitting together on the sofa, Margaret's arm around Eleanor's shoulders. They didn't talk much. They simply held each other and listened to the sounds of the night outside, the wind rustling through the autumn leaves, the distant sound of a train whistle, the occasional automobile passing on the street. At around 10 o'clock, Margaret suddenly tensed. "Did you hear that?" Eleanor listened carefully. "I don't hear anything." But Margaret was already standing, moving toward the window. She peered out through the curtains, and Eleanor saw her face go pale. "They're here," Margaret whispered. "Who's here? Mother, what do you see?" "There's a car parked across the street. It's been there for the past hour, but now there are men getting out." Eleanor rushed to the window and looked out. In the dim light from the street lamp, she could see two men in dark coats standing beside a black automobile. They seemed to be looking directly at their house. "Mother, we have to call the police." "No!" Margaret grabbed Eleanor's arm. "I told you, we can't trust the police. Some of them are involved in this." "Then what do we do?" Margaret was already moving, gathering up Eleanor's bag and pressing it into her hands. "You're going to go out the back door and run to Mrs. Patterson's house. Tell her what I told you, that if anything happened to me, she would know what to do." "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." Margaret's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Eleanor, this is not a discussion. You are going to do exactly as I say." "But what about you?" Margaret cupped Eleanor's face in her hands. "I'm going to face this. It's time I stopped running from the truth about your father's death. They'll kill you too. Maybe, but at least you'll be safe. And someday, when you're older and stronger, maybe you can find a way to get justice for both of us." Eleanor was crying now, great sobs that shook her entire body. "Please don't make me leave you. Please, Mother." Margaret kissed her daughter's forehead tenderly. "I love you, Eleanor. Never forget that. And never forget that you are stronger than you know." There was a sharp knock at the front door. Both women froze. "Go," Margaret whispered urgently. "Go now, through the kitchen. Don't look back." The knocking came again, louder and more insistent. "Mrs. Whitmore," called a man's voice from outside. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Margaret pushed Eleanor toward the back of the house. "Go, now!" Eleanor stumbled toward the kitchen, her vision blurred by tears. At the back door, she turned for one last look at her mother. Margaret stood in the parlor doorway, her shoulders squared and her chin raised defiantly. In the candlelight, she looked beautiful and brave and utterly determined. "I love you, Mother," Eleanor whispered. Margaret smiled, the same radiant smile she had worn in the photograph just hours earlier. "I love you too, my darling girl. Now go." Eleanor slipped out the back door and ran across the small yard toward Mrs. Patterson's house. Behind her, she heard the front door of her home open and her mother's voice, calm and steady, saying, "Gentlemen, I've been expecting you." As Eleanor reached Mrs. Patterson's back door and began pounding on it frantically, she heard the sound of automobile doors slamming and an engine starting. By the time Mrs. Patterson opened her door and pulled Eleanor inside, the black car was driving away into the night. Margaret Whitmore was gone, and Eleanor would never see her mother again. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen was warm and smelled of cinnamon and freshly baked bread. But Eleanor couldn't stop shivering as she sat at the small wooden table, clutching a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The elderly woman had wrapped a quilt around Eleanor's shoulders and was bustling around the kitchen, her face creased with worry and something that looked like fear. "Tell me again exactly what your mother said," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into the chair across from Eleanor. "Every word, child. It's important." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the handkerchief Mrs. Patterson had given her and tried to organize her thoughts. Everything felt surreal, like a terrible nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. She said that if anything happened to her, I should come to you, that you would know what to do. Eleanor's voice was hoarse from crying. "Mrs. Patterson, what did she mean? What do you know about this?" The older woman was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around her own teacup. Eleanor had known Mrs. Patterson all her life. She was a widow in her 60s who had lived next door for as long as Eleanor could remember. She had always been kind, bringing over soup when someone was sick and watching Eleanor when her parents needed to go out. But now there was something different about her, something that suggested depths Eleanor had never suspected. "Your mother and we talked sometimes," Mrs. Patterson said carefully, "about your father's death, about her suspicions. You knew. You knew what she suspected, and you didn't do anything. Child, you have to understand. Margaret tried to do something. She went to the police. She tried to investigate on her own. But the people involved in this, they have power, they have influence, and they don't hesitate to eliminate threats." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night. "You think they killed my father because he discovered something illegal at the factory? I think your father was an honest man who stumbled onto something he shouldn't have seen. And I think the people responsible for his death have been watching your mother ever since, waiting to see if she would become a problem. And now she has." Mrs. Patterson nodded grimly. "Margaret has been asking questions again lately. Discreetly, but not discreetly enough, apparently. She came to see me last week very upset. She said she had found something, some kind of evidence about what really happened to Thomas." Eleanor leaned forward urgently. "What kind of evidence?" "She didn't tell me the details. She said it was safer if I didn't know. But she was frightened, Eleanor, more frightened than I had ever seen her." "Then why didn't she just leave? Why didn't we both leave?" "Because she knew they would follow. And because..." Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Because she wanted to make sure you were safe before she did anything that might put you in danger." Eleanor felt tears threatening again. "She sacrificed herself for me. She protected you. There's a difference." Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. "And now we need to make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." "What do you mean?" "I mean we need to get you somewhere safe, tonight." Eleanor stared at her. "You want me to run away? I want you to survive. Margaret made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would make sure you got away from here safely." "But I can't just leave. What about school? What about our house? What about finding my mother?" Mrs. Patterson's expression was gentle but firm. "Eleanor, your mother is gone. Those men didn't take her for a friendly chat. And if you stay here, you'll be next." The brutal honesty of the words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She had been clinging to the hope that somehow her mother would come back, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding that could be resolved. But looking at Mrs. Patterson's face, she realized that hope was futile. "Where would I go?" she whispered. "Margaret gave me an address, a place where you'll be safe." Mrs. Patterson stood and went to a drawer in her kitchen cabinet, pulling out an envelope. She prepared for this possibility. "There's money here and instructions." Eleanor took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written on the front in her mother's familiar handwriting. Inside, she found several bills, more money than she had ever seen at one time, and a letter. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I am so sorry, my darling girl, that I have had to leave you. Please know that everything I have done has been to protect you and to try to get justice for your father. Mrs. Patterson will help you get to safety. Go to the address I have written below. Ask for Mrs. Helena Morrison. Tell her that Margaret sent you and that it's time to honor the old promise. She will understand and she will take care of you. I know this is frightening and confusing, but you must trust me. Do not try to contact the police. Do not try to investigate what happened to me or to your father. The people involved are too dangerous, and I will not have lost my life only to have you lose yours as well. Live, Eleanor. Live a good life, a happy life. Fall in love, have children, find joy in the world. That is the greatest gift you can give me, the knowledge that you are safe and happy. I love you more than words can express. You are my heart, my soul, my greatest achievement. Never forget that. All my love always, Mother. Eleanor read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she looked up to find Mrs. Patterson watching her with compassionate eyes. "Mrs. Morrison," Eleanor said. "Who is she?" "An old friend of your mother's. They grew up together, but Helena moved away years ago. She has resources. She can keep you safe, but I don't understand. Why didn't my mother ever mention her? Why all the secrecy?" Mrs. Patterson sighed. "Because the less you knew, the safer you were. Margaret has been planning for this possibility for 3 years, Eleanor. Ever since your father died, she's been preparing for the day when she might have to send you away." Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her mother had been carrying alone. She's been living with this fear all this time. She's been living with the knowledge that the people who killed your father were still out there, still dangerous. And she's been terrified that they would come for her too and leave you alone and unprotected. So she made sure I wouldn't be alone. She made sure you would have somewhere to go, someone to take care of you. Eleanor looked around Mrs. Patterson's cozy kitchen, at the woman who had been like a grandmother to her, at the familiar surroundings that represented the only life she had ever known. The thought of leaving it all behind was terrifying. "When do I have to go?" "Tonight. As soon as possible. Those men will be back, Eleanor. When they realize Margaret isn't going to tell them what they want to know, they'll come looking for you." "What if she does tell them? What if she's still alive and she tells them whatever they want to know?" Mrs. Patterson's expression was infinitely sad. "Oh, child, your mother would never betray your father's memory or put you in danger, no matter what they do to her." The implication of those words settled over Eleanor like a shroud. Her mother was not only gone, but she was probably suffering, and there was nothing Eleanor could do to help her. "I have to try to find her," Eleanor said suddenly, standing up so quickly that her chair scraped against the floor. "I can't just run away and leave her." "Eleanor, no." Mrs. Patterson stood as well, moving to block the kitchen door. "That's exactly what Margaret was afraid you would try to do. That's why she made me promise to get you away from here immediately." "But she's my mother. I can't just abandon her." "You're not abandoning her. You're honoring her sacrifice. You're doing what she gave her life to ensure you could do. You're surviving." Eleanor sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the impossible choice between her desire to help her mother and her mother's desperate wish to keep her safe. "How do I live with this?" she whispered. "How do I live knowing that my mother is gone and I did nothing to save her?" Mrs. Patterson knelt beside Eleanor's chair and took her hands. "You live by being the woman she raised you to be. You live by being strong and brave and good. You live by making sure that someday, when you're older and have resources of your own, you can find a way to get justice for both your parents. You think that's possible? I think your mother believed it was possible. And I think she believed that you were the one who could make it happen, but only if you survived long enough to try." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. Finally, she looked up at Mrs. Patterson with eyes that seemed older than her 16 years. "What do I need to do?" Mrs. Patterson smiled with relief and pride. "First, we need to get you ready to travel. The train to Chicago leaves at 6 in the morning. Mrs. Morrison lives about an hour outside the city." "Chicago? That's so far away." "That's the point, dear. Far away from here, far away from the people who hurt your family." They spent the next hour preparing for Eleanor's departure. Mrs. Patterson helped her repack her bag more efficiently, adding some food for the journey and a few practical items Eleanor hadn't thought to bring. She also gave Eleanor a small locket that had belonged to her own daughter, who had died in infancy many years before. "For protection," Mrs. Patterson said, fastening the chain around Eleanor's neck. "And to remind you that you're not alone in the world." As they worked, Mrs. Patterson told Eleanor what she knew about the journey ahead. She would take the early train to Chicago, then transfer to a local line that would take her to the small town where Mrs. Morrison lived. Mrs. Patterson had already sent a telegram, so Mrs. Morrison would be expecting her. "What do I tell people about why I'm there?" Eleanor asked. "Mrs. Morrison will help you create a new identity. A new name, a new history. You'll be her niece, come to live with her after a family tragedy. A new name." The idea was both terrifying and oddly liberating. It's the only way to be truly safe. The people who took your mother have resources, connections. If you keep your real name, they might eventually find you. As dawn approached, Mrs. Patterson walked Eleanor to the train station. The streets were quiet in the early morning light, and Eleanor found herself looking over her shoulder constantly, expecting to see the black automobile or the men in dark coats. But they encountered no one except a few early workers heading to their jobs. At the station, Mrs. Patterson bought Eleanor's ticket and walked her to the platform. As they waited for the train, Eleanor felt the full weight of what she was leaving behind. "Will I ever be able to come back?" she asked. "Someday, perhaps, when it's safe, when you're strong enough to face whatever you might find here." The train whistle sounded in the distance, and Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest. "I don't know if I can do this." Mrs. Patterson pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You can do this because you are Margaret Whitmore's daughter. You have her strength, her courage, her determination, and you have something to live for. The chance to honor your parents' memory by living the life they wanted you to have." The train pulled into the station with a great hissing of steam and squealing of brakes. Eleanor picked up her bag and turned to face her future. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, will you try to find out what happened to her?" "I'll do what I can, child. But you must promise me that you won't try to contact me, and you won't try to come back until Mrs. Morrison says it's safe." Eleanor nodded, though the promise felt like another small death. She boarded the train and found a seat by the window. As the train began to move, she watched Mrs. Patterson standing on the platform, growing smaller and smaller until she was just a tiny figure in the distance. Eleanor pressed her face to the window and watched her hometown disappear behind her, taking with it everything she had ever known and loved. But in her heart, she carried her mother's final gift, the chance to live, to grow strong, and perhaps someday to return and claim the justice that had been denied to her family. The train carried her toward an uncertain future, but also toward hope. And for now, hope was enough. The train journey to Chicago felt endless, each mile taking Eleanor further from everything familiar and deeper into an uncertain future. She sat by the window, watching the countryside roll past in a blur of autumn colors, her mother's letter clutched in her hands. She had read it so many times that she had memorized every word, every loop of her mother's careful handwriting. When the train finally pulled into Union Station in Chicago, Eleanor was overwhelmed by the sheer size and chaos of the place. The massive terminal was filled with travelers, vendors calling out their wares, and the constant echo of announcements over the loudspeaker. She had never seen so many people in one place, and for a moment she stood frozen on the platform, clutching her small bag and fighting the urge to get back on the train and return home. But there was no home to return to. That reality hit her again like a physical blow, and she forced herself to move forward, following the signs to the local train that would take her to Millbrook, the small town where Mrs. Morrison lived. The local train was smaller and less crowded, and Eleanor found herself sharing a car with farmers heading to market and a few other travelers who looked as tired and worn as she felt. As they left the city behind, the landscape became more rural, reminding her painfully of home. It was late afternoon when the train pulled into Millbrook Station. Eleanor stepped onto the platform and looked around uncertainly. The station was tiny compared to Union Station, just a small building with a single platform. A few people were waiting, but Eleanor had no idea what Mrs. Morrison looked like. "Eleanor Whitmore!" Eleanor turned to see a woman approaching her. She appeared to be in her 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. She was dressed simply but elegantly, in a dark blue coat and matching hat. "Yes," Eleanor said hesitantly. "Are you Mrs. Morrison?" "I am indeed, Helena Morrison." The woman's voice was warm and cultured, with just a hint of an accent Eleanor couldn't place. "I'm so sorry for your loss, my dear. Your mother was very precious to me." Eleanor felt tears threatening again. "You knew my mother well? We were like sisters once, long ago. But come, let's get you home. We have much to talk about, and you must be exhausted." Mrs. Morrison led Eleanor to a small but well-maintained automobile parked outside the station. As they drove through the town, Eleanor saw that Millbrook was indeed small, just a main street with a few shops, a church and a school, surrounded by farmland and wooded hills. "It's not much like the city," Mrs. Morrison said, noticing Eleanor's observation. "But it's peaceful here, safe. Sometimes that's more important than excitement." They drove for about 10 minutes before turning into a long driveway that led to a modest but charming house set back among tall oak trees. The house was painted white with green shutters, and there was a wraparound porch with hanging flower baskets that gave it a welcoming appearance. "This is home," Mrs. Morrison said simply. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." Inside, the house was warm and inviting, furnished with comfortable but not ostentatious pieces. There were books everywhere, on shelves, stacked on tables, even piled on the floor beside chairs. Eleanor noticed immediately that many of them appeared to be in foreign languages. "You read a lot," Eleanor observed. "Knowledge is power, my dear, and sometimes it's protection as well." Mrs. Morrison hung up her coat and turned to face Eleanor. "Now, I imagine you have many questions. Shall we have some tea and talk?" They settled in the kitchen, which was cozy and filled with the scent of herbs hanging from the rafters. As Mrs. Morrison prepared tea, Eleanor studied her more closely. There was something about the woman that suggested hidden depths, a sense that she was much more than she appeared to be. "Mrs. Morrison," Eleanor began, "my mother's letter mentioned something about honoring an old promise. What did she mean?" Mrs. Morrison was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling on the teapot. "Your mother and I made a pact many years ago, when we were not much older than you are now. We promised that if either of us ever needed help, the other would provide it, no questions asked. But why? What happened that made you feel you needed such a promise?" We both learned at a young age that the world can be a dangerous place for those who know too much or ask too many questions. We learned that sometimes the only people you can trust are those who have faced similar dangers. Eleanor felt a chill of recognition. "You mean you've been through something like what happened to my family?" "In a way, yes. My father was a journalist who investigated corruption in the government. One day he published a story that exposed some very powerful people, and shortly afterward, he died in what was ruled an accidental fall down the stairs of his office building." But you didn't believe it was an accident?" "I was 17 at the time, old enough to know that my father was careful and sure-footed, and that he had been receiving threats for weeks before his death. But I was also young enough to be powerless to do anything about it." Eleanor leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I did what your mother is asking you to do. I disappeared. I changed my name, created a new identity, and started over somewhere else." "Helena Morrison isn't your real name?" "No more than Eleanor Whitmore will be yours, if you choose to stay here." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor had known this moment was coming, but hearing it stated so plainly still came as a shock. "What would my new name be?" "That's up to you to some extent, but I was thinking perhaps Ellen Morrison, my niece, come to live with me after her parents died in an automobile accident." Ellen tested the name in her mind. It felt strange, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, but she supposed she would get used to it. "What about school? What about my future?" "You'll finish your education here in Millbrook." The school is small but good, and as for your future, Mrs. Morrison smiled, that will be whatever you make it, but you'll have time to figure it out without looking over your shoulder. Over the next few days, Eleanor began to settle into her new life. Mrs. Morrison, Helena, had prepared a small but comfortable bedroom for her, and she enrolled her in the local high school under the name Ellen Morrison. The story they told was simple. Ellen's parents had died in a car accident, and she had come to live with her aunt. The other students were curious, but not suspicious, and Eleanor found that it was easier than she had expected to slip into her new identity. The hardest part was remembering to respond to her new name, and not to mention anything about her real past. Helena proved to be a wonderful guardian. She was intelligent and well-educated, and she helped Eleanor with her studies in the evenings. She was also surprisingly well-informed about current events and politics, and Eleanor began to suspect that her new guardian was not quite the simple, small-town woman she appeared to be. "Helena," Eleanor said one evening as they sat reading in the living room, "what do you do for work? I've been here a week, and I've never seen you go to a job." Helena looked up from her book, which Eleanor noticed was written in what looked like Russian. "I do translation work. I speak several languages, and I translate documents for various clients. It allows me to work from home." "What kind of documents?" "Oh, various things. Business correspondence, legal papers, sometimes academic texts." Helena's tone was casual, but Eleanor sensed there was more to it than that. "Is that how you can afford to take care of me? I don't want to be a burden." "Eleanor, Ellen, you are not a burden. Your mother and we had arrangements. She helped me once, long ago, and now I'm helping you. That's how these things work." Eleanor wanted to ask more questions, but something in Helena's manner suggested that the subject was closed. She was learning that her new guardian had depths and secrets of her own, and that some topics were not open for discussion. As the weeks passed, Eleanor began to receive letters from Mrs. Patterson. They were carefully worded and gave no specific details, but they painted a grim picture of what had happened after Eleanor's departure. Her family's house had been searched by men claiming to be police officers. Several people in town who had been friends with her parents had been questioned, and there had been no word of her mother. "She's not coming back, is she?" Eleanor asked Helena after reading one particularly cryptic letter. Helena looked up from her own correspondence, which Eleanor noticed was written in several different languages and came from various countries. "I'm sorry, my dear, I don't think she is." Eleanor had been expecting this confirmation, but it still hit her like a physical blow. She had been holding on to a tiny thread of hope that somehow her mother had escaped, that she was hiding somewhere and would eventually find a way to contact her daughter. But deep down, she had known the truth. "How do you bear it?" Eleanor asked. "How do you live with knowing that the people who hurt your family are still out there, still free?" Helena set down her letters and looked at Eleanor with eyes that held years of pain and hard-won wisdom. "You bear it by living, by becoming strong, by making sure that their sacrifice wasn't in vain. But don't you want revenge? Don't you want justice?" "I want many things, Ellen, but I've learned that wanting and getting are two very different things, and I've learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving and thriving despite what they did to you." Eleanor wasn't satisfied with that answer, but she was beginning to understand that Helena had made peace with her past in a way that Eleanor wasn't ready to do yet. The anger and grief were still too fresh, too raw. As winter settled over Millbrook, Eleanor threw herself into her studies and tried to build a new life. She made friends at school, carefully, always remembering not to reveal too much about her past. She helped Helena with her translation work, discovering that she had a talent for languages. And slowly, gradually, she began to feel like Ellen Morrison was becoming a real person, not just a disguise. But late at night, when the house was quiet and she was alone with her thoughts, she was still Eleanor Whitmore, the girl whose parents had been murdered by powerful people who had never been held accountable. And she made herself a promise. Someday, When she was older and stronger and had resources of her own, she would find a way to get justice for her family. Helena seemed to sense her thoughts one evening as they sat by the fire, each reading their respective books. "Ellen," she said quietly, "I know you're planning something. I can see it in your eyes." Eleanor looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I recognize the look of someone who is biding their time, waiting for the right moment to act. I had the same look once." "And what did you do about it?" Helena smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I learned that some battles can't be won by one person alone. And I learned that sometimes the most important thing is not getting justice, but making sure the next generation has the tools they need to get justice." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you're determined to pursue this path, and I suspect you are, then I want to make sure you're prepared for it. I want to teach you everything I know about staying safe, about gathering information, about building the kind of network you'll need if you're going to take on powerful people." Eleanor stared at her guardian, realizing that Helena was offering her something far more valuable than just a safe place to hide. She was offering her the tools she would need to fight back. "You'll teach me?" "I'll teach you, but not yet. First, you need to finish growing up. You need to complete your education, develop your skills, and learn patience. The people who hurt your family have been powerful for a long time. They're not going anywhere. But if you move too soon, before you're ready, you'll end up like your parents." Eleanor nodded, understanding the wisdom in Helena's words, even as her heart burned with impatience for justice. "How long?" she asked. "Years," Helena said honestly. "Maybe many years. But Ellen, if you're serious about this, if you're truly committed to seeing it through, then I promise you this. When you're ready, you'll have everything you need to make them pay for what they did." Eleanor looked into the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. Somewhere out there, the people who had killed her father and taken her mother were living their lives, probably thinking they had gotten away with murder. They had no idea that a 16-year-old girl was planning their downfall. But she was, and with Helena's help, she would be ready when the time came. The photograph of her and her mother, which she kept hidden in her dresser drawer, served as a daily reminder of what she had lost and what she was fighting for. In that picture, they were both smiling, both happy, both unaware that their time together was about to end. But Eleanor would make sure their story didn't end with that night in 1935. She would make sure it ended with justice. 5 years had passed since Eleanor Whitmore had become Ellen Morrison, and the transformation was remarkable. At 21, she had grown into a poised, intelligent young woman who spoke 4 languages fluently and could discuss everything from international politics to advanced mathematics with equal ease. To the residents of Millbrook, she was simply Helena Morrison's niece, a bright girl who had overcome tragedy to build a promising future. But beneath the surface, Ellen Morrison was being carefully crafted into something far more dangerous than anyone in the small town could imagine. Helena had been true to her word. Over the years, she had taught Ellen skills that no ordinary young woman would ever need. How to pick locks, how to forge documents, how to follow someone without being detected, how to gather information without arousing suspicion. She had also taught her more conventional skills, typing, shorthand, bookkeeping, that would allow her to blend into the business world when the time came. Information is the most powerful weapon in the world, Helena had told her during one of their evening lessons. More powerful than guns, more powerful than money. If you know the right secrets about the right people, you can bring down empires. Ellen had proven to be an exceptional student. She had a natural talent for languages and an almost photographic memory for details. More importantly, she had the patience and discipline necessary for the kind of long-term planning that their eventual mission would require. It was on a cold February evening in 1941 that Helena finally judged Ellen ready for the next phase of her education. "It's time," Helena said, as they sat in the living room after dinner. "Time for you to learn the truth about what we're really doing here." Ellen looked up from the German newspaper she had been translating. Over the years, she had grown accustomed to Helena's cryptic statements, but something in her guardian's tone suggested that this was different. "What do you mean?" Helena stood and walked to the bookshelf that dominated one wall of the living room. She pressed something behind one of the books, and Ellen heard a soft click. A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a hidden room beyond. Ellen stared in amazement. "How long has that been there?" "Since I bought the house. Come, there's something you need to see." Ellen followed Helena into the hidden room and gasped. The space was larger than she had expected, and it was filled with filing cabinets, maps, photographs, and what appeared to be radio equipment. One wall was covered with a massive map of the United States, marked with pins and colored strings connecting various locations. "Welcome to my real office," Helena said with a slight smile. Ellen walked slowly around the room, taking in the details. The filing cabinets were labeled with names and locations. The photographs showed various people, some of whom Ellen recognized from newspapers as prominent politicians and businessmen. The radio equipment looked sophisticated and expensive. "Helena, what is all this?" "This is the network your mother and I dreamed of building when we were young. A network of people who have been wronged by those in power, who are working together to gather information and, when possible, to get justice." Ellen stopped in front of the map, studying the pins and connections. "How many people are involved?" "More than you might think. Fewer than we need." Helena joined her at the map. "Each pin represents someone like us, someone who lost family to corruption, someone who was forced to disappear, someone who is working to expose the truth." And the string: connections, relationships, shared information, mutual support. Helena pointed to a cluster of pins in the Midwest. "This group has been investigating corruption in the steel industry. This one," she indicated pins on the West Coast, "is focused on political corruption in California. And this one," she pointed to pins in the Northeast, "is working on something that will interest you very much." Ellen followed Helena's finger to a concentration of pins around Pennsylvania and Ohio. "What are they investigating?" "The same factory where your father worked, the same people who killed him." Ellen felt her heart begin to race. "You mean..." "I mean, we never stopped investigating your father's death, Ellen. We've been building a case for 5 years, gathering evidence, identifying the people responsible. And we're finally close to having enough to bring them down." Ellen sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Helena was revealing. "You've been working on this the whole time, while I've been going to school and learning languages and thinking we were just waiting. We were never just waiting. Every skill I taught you, every lesson we shared, every contact I helped you make, it was all preparation for this moment." Helena walked to one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder. "This contains everything we know about the people who killed your father and took your mother. Names, addresses, business relationships, criminal activities. It's taken 5 years to compile, but we finally have enough to destroy them." Ellen opened the folder with trembling hands. The first page contained a photograph of a man in an expensive suit, standing beside a luxury automobile. The name beneath the photo read, "Vincent Castellano, factory owner and political operative. He's the one who ordered my father's death. He's one of them. Your father discovered that Castellano was using the factory to launder money for various criminal enterprises. He was also using the workers as a source of cheap labor for illegal activities, forcing them to work overtime without pay, skimming from their wages, that sort of thing. When your father threatened to expose him, he had him killed." Ellen's voice was flat, emotionless. "And when your mother started asking questions, he had her taken as well." Ellen flipped through the folder, seeing page after page of evidence. Financial records, witness statements, photographs of meetings between Castellano and known criminals. It was overwhelming and damning. "How did you get all this?" "The network. People like us, working together. A secretary who makes copies of documents. A janitor who overhears conversations. A bookkeeper who notices discrepancies in the accounts. Individually, none of us has enough power to take on people like Castellano. But together we can bring them down." "Exactly. But Ellen, you need to understand what this means. If we move forward with this, there's no going back. These people killed your parents. They won't hesitate to kill us if they discover what we're doing. Ellen closed the folder and looked at Helena with eyes that held 5 years of carefully controlled anger and grief. What do you need me to do? Helena smiled, and for the first time since Ellen had known her, it was a smile with real warmth and pride. I need you to go to Pittsburgh. There's a position available at Castellano's main office, secretary to his business manager. With your skills and qualifications, you'll be perfect for the job. You want me to work for him? For the man who killed my parents? I want you to get close enough to gather the final pieces of evidence we need. Financial records, correspondence, anything that will definitively link him to your father's death and to the other crimes we know he's committed. Ellen felt a thrill of fear and excitement. After 5 years of preparation, she was finally going to face her family's killer. When do I start? Next month. I've already arranged for Ellen Morrison to have the perfect background for the position. Excellent references, impeccable credentials, no suspicious connections to anyone involved in the case. And after I get the evidence, then we expose everything. Not just to the local police, we know some of them are corrupt, but to the federal authorities, to the newspapers, to anyone who will listen. We make sure the whole world knows what Vincent Castellano really is. Ellen stood and walked back to the map, studying the network of pins and connections. And the others, the people in the network, they'll be doing the same thing in their own areas with their own targets. This isn't just about getting justice for your family, Ellen. This is about exposing a whole system of corruption that has been allowed to flourish for too long. What about my mother? Will we ever find out what really happened to her? Helena's expression grew sad. I hope so. But Ellen, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that we may never know for certain. These people are very good at making problems disappear permanently. Ellen nodded, accepting the harsh reality. She had known for years that her mother was probably dead, but she had never stopped hoping for some kind of closure. There's one more thing, Helena said, walking to another filing cabinet. Something I've been saving for when you were ready. She pulled out a small box and handed it to Ellen. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the photograph that had been taken of Ellen and her mother on that last day in 1935. But this wasn't the copy Ellen had been keeping in her dresser drawer. This was a different print, and on the back, in her mother's handwriting, were the words, "For my brave daughter, who will someday make things right." Ellen stared at the photograph, remembering that day with painful clarity. Her mother's smile, the way she had insisted on having the picture taken, the urgency in her voice when she talked about capturing memories. She knew, Ellen whispered. She knew what was going to happen. She suspected, and she wanted to make sure you had something to remind you of who you were and what you were fighting for. Ellen carefully placed the photograph back in the box. I won't let her down. I know you won't. But Ellen, promise me something. Promise me that you won't let the desire for revenge consume you. Your parents wouldn't want you to destroy yourself in the process of destroying their killers. Ellen looked at Helena, this woman who had given her a new life and the tools to reclaim her old one. I promise. But I also promise that Vincent Castellano and everyone who helped him will pay for what they did. Helena nodded. Then it's time to begin the final phase of your education. In 3 weeks, Ellen Morrison will travel to Pittsburgh to begin her new job, and Eleanor Whitmore will finally have her chance at justice. As they left the hidden room and Helena sealed it behind the bookshelf, Ellen felt as if she were crossing a threshold. The quiet years in Millbrook were over. The careful preparation was complete. Now came the dangerous part, infiltrating the enemy's stronghold and gathering the evidence that would bring him down. But she was ready. 5 years of training had prepared her for this moment, and somewhere, she believed, her parents were watching and waiting for their daughter to fulfill the promise she had made in their memory. The photograph in the box seemed to pulse with significance. In it, she and her mother were smiling, unaware of the tragedy that awaited them. But now Ellen knew something that the girl in the photograph hadn't known, Sometimes the darkest moments are just the beginning of a longer story, one that ends not with defeat, but with justice. Vincent Castellano had no idea that Eleanor Whitmore was coming for him, but he was about to find out. Pittsburgh in March of 1941 was a city of smoke and steel, where the air tasted of coal dust and the sky was perpetually grey with industrial haze. Ellen Morrison stepped off the train at Union Station with a single suitcase and a carefully crafted identity that had taken 5 years to perfect. To anyone watching, she was simply another young woman seeking employment in the bustling industrial city. But beneath her modest grey coat and professional demeanour, she carried the weight of a mission that had consumed her life since that terrible night in 1935. The Castellano Industries building dominated a full city block in the heart of Pittsburgh's business district. It was an imposing structure of granite and steel, its windows reflecting the smoky sky like dead eyes. Ellen stood across the street for a moment, studying the building where her father's killer conducted his business, feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Miss Morrison," a young man in a crisp suit approached her as she entered the lobby. "I'm James Patterson, Mr. Castellano's business manager. We spoke on the telephone about the secretarial position." Ellen smiled politely, slipping effortlessly into her role. "Yes, of course. Thank you for meeting me personally, Mr. Patterson. Please call me James. Mr. Castellano likes to maintain a friendly atmosphere in the office." He led her toward the elevators, chatting pleasantly about the building and the company. "You'll find this a very different environment from your previous position in Chicago." Ellen had memorized every detail of her fictional background. "I'm looking forward to the challenge. I understand Mr. Castellano's business interests are quite diverse." "Indeed they are. Steel, shipping, real estate, political consulting. Mr. Castellano has his fingers in many pies, as they say." The elevator carried them to the 15th floor, where the executive offices were located. Ellen noted the security measures, guards at key points, locked doors requiring special keys, and what appeared to be a sophisticated alarm system. Helena had trained her to observe such details automatically. "This will be your desk," James said, indicating a position just outside a large corner office. "You'll be handling Mr. Castellano's correspondence, scheduling, and various administrative duties. The work can be demanding, but the compensation is excellent." Room. Through the open door of the corner office, Ellen caught her first glimpse of Vincent Castellano. He was a large man in his 50s, with graying hair and cold eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He was speaking on the telephone, his voice carrying clearly into the outer office. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying. "The problem needs to disappear permanently, just like the last one." Ellen felt her blood turn to ice. Was he talking about another murder, another family being destroyed to protect his secrets? "Mr. Castellano will want to meet you personally," James said, apparently oblivious to the sinister implications of what they had just overheard. "He likes to interview all his personal staff himself." Ellen spent the rest of the morning being oriented to her new position. She met the other secretaries, learned the filing system, and familiarized herself with the office procedures. All the while, she was cataloging everything she saw: the layout of the offices, the security procedures, the names and faces of key personnel. It was just before lunch when James finally escorted her into Castellano's office for her interview. The room was opulent, with expensive furniture, original artwork, and a massive desk that seemed designed to intimidate visitors. Castellano himself was even more imposing in person, his presence filling the room with an aura of barely contained violence. "Miss Morrison," he said, not bothering to stand as she entered. "James tells me you come highly recommended. I hope to prove worthy of your confidence, Mr. Castellano." Ellen kept her voice steady, professional, giving no hint of the emotions churning inside her. Castellano studied her with those cold eyes, and Ellen had the uncomfortable feeling that he was evaluating her as a potential threat. "You're very young to have such impressive credentials. Tell me about your previous employer in Chicago." Ellen recited the carefully prepared story Helena had created for her. A small law firm, a senior partner who had retired, excellent references that would check out if anyone bothered to verify them. She had practiced this story hundreds of times until it felt as natural as the truth. "And why did you choose to come to Pittsburgh? A young woman like you could find work anywhere." "I wanted a more challenging position, Mr. Castellano. And I've heard that Castellano Industries offers exceptional opportunities for advancement." Something in Castellano's expression shifted, and Ellen realized she had said exactly the right thing. He was a man who appreciated ambition, who understood the hunger for power and success. "Indeed we do, Miss Morrison. Indeed we do." He leaned back in his chair, apparently satisfied with what he had seen. "James, I think Miss Morrison will do very well here. See that she has everything she needs." Over the following weeks, Ellen settled into her new role with carefully calculated efficiency. She was professional but not overly eager, competent but not threatening, friendly but not familiar. She made herself indispensable without making herself conspicuous, and all the while she was gathering information. Her position gave her access to Castellano's correspondence, his appointment calendar, and his filing system. She learned the names of his associates, the details of his business dealings, and the intricate web of corruption that surrounded his operations. Every evening, she returned to her modest boarding house room and carefully transcribed everything she had learned, using a code Helena had taught her. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into her employment. Castellano had left early for a meeting, and Ellen was alone in the outer office when she noticed that he had forgotten to lock his personal filing cabinet. It was a small oversight, but one that would prove costly for him. Inside the cabinet, Ellen found a treasure trove of incriminating documents, financial records showing payments to corrupt officials, correspondence discussing the elimination of problems, and in a folder marked Factory Incidents, she found what she had been looking for. The file contained a report on her father's death, written in clinical language that made her stomach turn. "Subject was becoming increasingly problematic," the report read. "Recommended permanent solution implemented successfully. No further action required." Attached to the report was a photograph of her father, taken apparently without his knowledge, as he left the factory on his last day of work. Someone had drawn a red X across his face. Ellen's hands shook as she photographed the documents with the small camera Helena had given her. This was the evidence they needed, proof that her father's death had been deliberate, ordered by Castellano himself. But as she was replacing the files, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Castellano was returning early from his meeting. Ellen quickly closed the filing cabinet and returned to her desk, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he would hear it. "Miss Morrison," Castellano said as he entered the office, "I thought you had left for the day." "I was just finishing up some correspondence, Mr. Castellano. I wanted to make sure everything was ready for tomorrow's meetings." He studied her for a moment, and Ellen forced herself to meet his gaze calmly. "Very dedicated. I appreciate that in an employee." But as he walked toward his office, Ellen noticed him glance at the filing cabinet. Had she left some sign that it had been disturbed? Had he noticed something out of place? That evening, Ellen sent a coded message to Helena through their established communication network. The evidence was gathered. It was time to move to the final phase of their plan. Helena's response came the next day. "Prepare for extraction. Network activated. Justice comes tomorrow." Ellen spent her last day at Castellano Industries in a state of heightened alertness. Everything seemed normal on the surface, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Castellano was more watchful than usual, and she caught him staring at her several times with an expression she couldn't read. It was late in the afternoon when James Patterson approached her desk with an unusual request. "Miss Morrison, Mr. Castellano would like to see you in his office. He has a special assignment for you." Ellen's instincts screamed danger, but she had no choice but to comply. She walked into Castellano's office with her head held high, prepared for whatever was coming. Castellano was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn around when she entered. "Close the door, Miss Morrison." Ellen did as instructed, noting that there were two other men in the office, men she recognized as Castellano's personal security. "Tell me," Castellano said, finally turning to face her, "what do you know about a family named Whitmore?" Ellen's blood turned to ice, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not familiar with that name, Mr. Castellano." "Really? That's interesting, because I've been doing some research into your background, Miss Morrison. And I've discovered some very curious inconsistencies in your story." "I'm not sure what you mean." Castellano walked to his desk and picked up a folder. "For instance, the law firm in Chicago where you claim to have worked, it burned down 6 years ago. All the records were destroyed. Very convenient for someone who wanted to create a false identity." Ellen's mind raced, looking for an escape route. The two security men were blocking the door, and she was trapped in the office with a man who had already killed her parents. "And then, there's this," Castellano continued, pulling out a photograph. It was the picture of Ellen and her mother, taken on that last day in 1935. "I found this in your boarding house room. Imagine my surprise when I recognized the woman in the photograph." Ellen stared at the picture, her carefully constructed cover story crumbling around her. "Where did you get that?" "From your room, of course, after I became suspicious about your real identity." Castellano's smile was cold and predatory. "You see, Miss Morrison, or should I say Miss Whitmore, I never forget a face, and I remember your mother very well. She was quite persistent in her questions about your father's unfortunate accident. What did you do to her?" Ellen's voice was barely a whisper. "The same thing I'm going to do to you. The same thing I did to your father when he became inconvenient." Castellano nodded to his security men. "Take her to the warehouse. Make sure she disappears as completely as her mother did." But as the men moved toward her, Ellen heard a sound that made her heart leap with hope. The wail of police sirens, growing louder by the second. Castellano heard it too, and his expression changed from predatory confidence to alarm. "What the hell?" The office door burst open, and federal agents poured into the room, weapons drawn. "Vincent Castellano, you're under arrest for murder, racketeering, and conspiracy." Ellen sagged with relief as she realized that Helena's network had come through. While she had been gathering evidence from the inside, other members of the network had been working with federal authorities to coordinate a massive raid on Castellano's operations. "You have no proof of anything," Castellano snarled as the agents handcuffed him. "Actually, we have quite a bit of proof," said the lead agent, a stern-faced man in his 40s. "Thanks to Miss Whitmore here, we have photographs of documents from your personal files, including detailed records of the murders you ordered." As Castellano was led away, he turned back to Ellen with eyes full of hatred. "You think this is over? You think you've won? I have friends, connections. I'll be out in a year, and when you are," Ellen said quietly, "I'll be waiting, and next time, you won't see me coming." The aftermath of Castellano's arrest was swift and comprehensive. The evidence Ellen had gathered, combined with information provided by other members of Helena's network, led to the exposure of a massive corruption ring that reached into the highest levels of business and government. Dozens of arrests were made, and the story dominated headlines across the country. Ellen returned to Millbrook a hero, but also a young woman who had finally found closure. The photograph of her and her mother, which had been returned to her by the federal agents, now sat on her dresser, not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of justice achieved. "It's over," Helena said as they sat in the living room of the house that had been Ellen's sanctuary for 6 years. "No," Ellen replied, looking at the map in Helena's hidden room with its network of pins representing other people seeking justice for their own losses. "It's just the beginning. There are others out there like Castellano, other families who deserve justice." Helena smiled with pride and affection. "Then I suppose we have more work to do." Ellen nodded, thinking of her parents and the sacrifice they had made. Their deaths had not been in vain. They had led to the exposure of a criminal network and the prevention of countless other tragedies. But more than that, They had created something powerful, a network of people committed to fighting corruption and protecting the innocent. Eleanor Whitmore had died with her parents that night in 1935, but Ellen Morrison had been born from that tragedy, stronger and more determined than ever. The photograph on her dresser showed a mother and daughter smiling together, unaware of the darkness that was about to engulf them. But now, Ellen knew that sometimes the darkest moments are just the beginning of a story that ends not with defeat, but with triumph. Vincent Castellano would spend the rest of his life in prison, and the network he had built would be dismantled piece by piece. And somewhere, Ellen believed, her parents were finally at rest, knowing that their daughter had kept the promise she had made in their memory. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a new kind of family had been created, one bound not by blood, but by a shared commitment to making sure that no other child would have to grow up as Ellen had, with the weight of unavenged loss on their shoulders. The work would continue, and Ellen Morrison would be at the center of it, carrying forward the legacy of love and courage that Margaret and Thomas Whitmore had left behind. Epilogue. 10 years later, Ellen Morrison had become one of the most respected investigators in the country, leading a network that had grown to include hundreds of people across the United States and beyond. The photograph of her and her mother remained on her desk in her Washington, D.C. office, a reminder of where it all began. The network had evolved into a legitimate organization that worked closely with federal law enforcement to investigate corruption and bring criminals to justice. They had solved dozens of cases, reunited families, and prevented countless tragedies. And sometimes, late at night when she was working on a particularly difficult case, Ellen would look at that photograph and remember the promise she had made to her mother's memory. She had kept that promise, and in doing so, had created something that would outlast them all, a legacy of justice that would continue long after she was gone. The mother and daughter in the 1935 photograph were still smiling, but now their smiles represented not just a moment of happiness before tragedy, but the beginning of a story that had changed the world.